He was her everything, the man she vowed to love in sickness and in health. But when she needed him most, when she was bringing their child into the world, he laughed. That single cruel sound shattered more than just her heart. It forged a will of iron. Fast forward 5 years. She's not the weeping woman he remembers. She's the master of a sprawling mansion, a self-made millionaire. And him. He's standing at her gates not as a husband, but as a guest about to learn the devastating price of a heartless laugh. This is the story of how a single moment of cruelty can change everything. The fluorescent lights of the delivery room hummed a monotonous, sterile tune, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of pain radiating through Amelia's body. Every muscle screamed, every nerve ending was a live wire. Sweat plastered her dark hair to her temples, and her breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. For 17 hours she had been locked in this primal battle, her body a vessel for a miracle that felt more like a medieval torture session. Across the room, her husband, Richard, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his face a mask of bored impatience. He'd been supportive at first, holding her hand, whispering what he probably thought were encouraging words. But as the hours dragged on, his patience had worn thinner than the hospital-issued gown she wore. He'd started checking his phone, sighing dramatically, and making ill-timed jokes that fell flat in the tense air. Can you just rub my back? Please." Amelia gritted out her voice, barely a whisper. The pain was a relentless wave cresting higher and higher, and she felt like she was drowning. Richard looked up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Again, I just did that, honey. The nurse said it could still be a while. Please." She begged, the word tearing from her throat. It's really bad." With an exaggerated sigh, he pushed himself off the wall and shuffled over to her bedside. His touch was clumsy perfunctory, a far cry from the tender caresses he'd once showered her with. It was the touch of a man fulfilling an obligation, not a partner sharing in a profound, life-altering experience. They had met in college, a whirlwind romance straight out of a storybook. He was the charming, ambitious business major, and she was the bright-eyed art history student captivated by his confidence and grand plans. He'd promised her the world, a life of comfort and security, and for a while he'd delivered. They married a year after graduation, and he quickly climbed the corporate ladder at a prestigious financial firm. Amelia, at his urging, had put her own career aspirations on hold to create the perfect home, to be the perfect corporate wife. She hosted his colleagues, remembered their birthdays, and smoothed over his social gaffes with her innate grace. She was the wind beneath his wings, a role she had accepted with love and devotion. Now, as another contraction seized her, a guttural cry escaped her lips. She squeezed her eyes shut, her knuckles white as she gripped the bed rails. I can't do this," she sobbed, the fear and exhaustion overwhelming her. "Don't be so dramatic, Amelia," Richard said, his voice laced with an unnerving detachment. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years. It's natural." His words were a slap in the face. Natural. This agony felt anything but natural. It felt like her body was being torn asunder. She needed his strength, his compassion, his unwavering support. Instead, she got platitudes and a lecture on the history of childbirth. The doctor came in then, her expression calm but firm. "Okay, Amelia, it's time. On the next contraction, I need you to push with everything you've got. summoning a reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed, Amelia did as she was told. She pushed until stars exploded behind her eyelids, until her throat was raw from screaming. And then, in a moment of sheer, blinding agony, she lost control. Her body convulsed, and a strange, involuntary sound, a mix between a groan and a grunt, erupted from deep within her. And that's when it happened. Richard laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle, a nervous titter. It was a full-throated, unrestrained laugh, laced with a derisive edge that cut through the haze of her pain. He pointed at her. His face crinkled in amusement. "Did you hear that? You sound like a wild animal." Time seemed to stop. The hum of the lights, the encouraging words of the doctor, the frantic beating of her own heart, it all faded into a deafening silence. The only thing that existed in that moment was the sound of her husband's laughter, echoing in the sterile room, a cruel, mocking testament to her vulnerability. A profound and chilling clarity washed over Amelia. In that single, heart-shattering moment, the man she had loved, the man she had built her life around, ceased to exist. In his place stood a stranger, a man who could find humor in her suffering, who could mock her at her most primal, most exposed moment. The love she had so carefully nurtured for him, the years of sacrifice and unwavering support, all of it curdled into something cold and hard in her chest. A new kind of strength born, not of love, but of a chilling, resolute fury surged through her. With a final primal scream that had nothing to do with the pain of childbirth and everything to do with the birth of a new, unshakable resolve, she gave one last monumental push. And then the room was filled with the lusty cry of a newborn baby. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, her voice warm and congratulatory. They laid the tiny, wriggling creature on Amelia's chest, and as she looked into the impossibly dark eyes of her daughter, she made a silent, solemn vow. She would never again be in a position where she had to beg for comfort. She would never again allow herself to be made small by a man who saw her strength as a spectacle for his amusement. Richard, his laughter having subsided, stepped forward, a proud, fatherly smile now plastered on his face. "She's beautiful, Amelia, just like her mother." Amelia didn't look at him. She couldn't. The sight of him made her stomach turn. She just held her daughter, her tiny, perfect daughter, and whispered, "Hello, Olivia. It's just you and me now." The laughter had stopped, but for Amelia the echo of it would linger forever, a constant burning reminder of the moment her world broke apart, and the moment she began to piece it back together on her own terms. The love story was over. A story of survival, of revenge, of a woman's indomitable will to rise from the ashes of a shattered heart, was just beginning. The first few weeks at home were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the constant, overwhelming needs of a newborn. The sprawling suburban house that had once felt like a symbol of their success now felt like a gilded cage. The silence between Amelia and Richard was a tangible entity, a third person in their marriage, cold and unwelcome. Richard, for his part, seemed oblivious to the chasm that had opened between them. He played the role of the doting new father, posting endless photos of Olivia on social media, boasting to his friends and colleagues about his beautiful daughter. He'd come home from work, kiss Amelia on the cheek, and ask in a perfunctory tone, "How was your day, honey?" Amelia would murmur a non-committal response, fine or tiring, her eyes never meeting his. The laughter in the delivery room had severed something vital between them, a cord of intimacy and trust that could never be reattached. She looked at him and saw not the father of her child, but a stranger who had mocked her at her most vulnerable. The memory was a festering wound, and his every touch, every casual endearment was like salt being rubbed into it. He tried to initiate intimacy to bridge the gap with physical affection, but Amelia would flinch away, feigning exhaustion or a headache. The truth was, his touch repulsed her. The memory of his laughing face was superimposed over every loving gesture, turning it into a grotesque parody. How could she share her body with a man who had treated her pain as a joke? The nights were the hardest, while Richard slept soundly beside her, his breathing even and untroubled. Amelia would lie awake, Olivia sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, and a cold, hard knot of anger would tighten in her stomach. She would replay the scene in the delivery room over and over in her mind, the sound of his laughter, a phantom echo that haunted the quiet hours of the night. It was in these dark, lonely hours that the seeds of her future began to germinate. She had given up her dreams for him, poured all her energy and creativity into building his world. And for what? To be ridiculed in her moment of greatest need, the anger she realized was a powerful fuel. It burned away the last vestiges of the naive, trusting woman she had once been leaving in its place a steely resolve. One night, as the moon cast long shadows across the bedroom, she slipped out of bed and went to the nursery. She stood over Olivia's crib, watching the gentle rise and fall of her tiny chest. A fierce, protective love, more powerful than anything she had ever known, washed over her. She would build a world for this child, a world where she would never be dependent on the whims of a man, a world where she would be safe and secure. The next morning, something in Amelia had shifted. The fog of postpartum exhaustion had lifted, replaced by a crystalline clarity of purpose. While Olivia napped, she didn't scroll mindlessly through social media or watch daytime television. She went to her long-neglected home office, a space that had been more of a storage room for Richard's old college textbooks and sporting equipment than a place of work. She dusted off her old laptop, the one she'd used for her art history thesis, and the screen flickered to life, a beacon in the dim, cluttered room. Her fingers at first hesitant, then with growing confidence flew across the keyboard. She started researching, delving into the world of online businesses, e-commerce, and digital marketing. Her art history degree, which Richard had often dismissed as useless, had given her a keen eye for aesthetics, a deep understanding of historical trends, and a knack for storytelling. She realized she could leverage these skills in the digital marketplace. She started small, creating a curated online boutique selling vintage-inspired home decor. She used her art historian's eye to source unique, beautiful pieces from flea markets, estate sales, and obscure online vendors. She photographed each item with an artist's sensibility, staging them in her own home, creating a narrative around each piece. Her product descriptions were not just lists of dimensions and materials. They were stories weaving in the history and craftsmanship of each object. She named the boutique the Gilded Cage, a private, bitter joke that fueled her ambition. To the world, it was a chic, sophisticated brand. To her, it was a constant reminder of what she was fighting to escape. Richard barely noticed her new preoccupation. He saw her on her laptop and assumed she was playing on the internet, as he dismissively called it. He was too consumed with his own world, his own career, to pay much attention to his wife's little hobby. The first sale came a month later, a modest purchase of a set of antique teacups. Amelia watched the notification pop up on her screen, her heart pounding with a thrill she hadn't felt in years. It was a small victory, but it was hers, and it was a taste of the independence she craved. The sales started to trickle in, then flow. Her keen eye for trends, her elegant branding, and her compelling storytelling resonated with a growing audience. She reinvested every penny she made back into the business, expanding her inventory, upgrading her website, and learning everything she could about search engine optimization and social media marketing. She worked in the stolen hours of the day while Olivia slept, or in the dead of night while Richard snored beside her. The house was her warehouse, the garage her shipping department. She was a one-woman army, fueled by coffee ambition and a burning desire to prove him wrong. One evening, Richard came home from work, tossing his briefcase onto the sofa with a weary sigh. "Tough day at the office," he announced, loosening his tie. "The market's in a slump. We lost a major client." Amelia, who was in the midst of packaging an order for a hand-painted Italian vase, looked up, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. His world of high finance, which had once seemed so important, so all-consuming, now felt distant and insignificant. "That's a shame," she said, her voice neutral. She sealed the box with packing tape, the sound a crisp, definitive rip in the quiet room. He looked at her, then a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He noticed, perhaps for the first time, the stacks of boxes in the corner, the meticulous organization of her workspace. "You're still doing this thing?" he asked, a hint of condescension in his tone. "Are you actually making any money from it?" Amelia met his gaze, her own eyes cool and steady. "Enough," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She printed the shipping label and affixed it to the box. In that moment, she wasn't just a wife and mother. She was a businesswoman, an entrepreneur, the silent architect of a new life, a life that was slowly but surely diverging from his. And he, in his arrogance and self-absorption, was completely oblivious to the fact that the foundations of his world were beginning to crumble. The gilded cage was about to be broken open, not by force, but by the quiet, relentless work of the woman he had so foolishly underestimated. The next 2 years passed in a whirlwind of dual realities. To Richard, life continued on its predictable, comfortable trajectory. He went to the office, he played golf on the weekends, he attended PTA meetings where he'd charm the other parents with his easy smile and confident demeanor. He saw Amelia as the dutiful wife, the devoted mother, the woman who kept his home running like a well-oiled machine. He noticed she was on her laptop more often, that the garage was becoming increasingly cluttered with boxes, but he dismissed it as a harmless, time-filling hobby. He was the breadwinner, the one whose career mattered, the one who provided for their family. Her little online shop was in his mind, a quaint diversion, something to keep her busy while he conquered the world of finance. He was living in a world of his own, making a comfortable illusion that was about to be spectacularly shattered. Amelia's world, in contrast, was a hive of activity, a parallel universe humming with the energy of creation and commerce. The gilded cage had exploded. What had started as a small, curated collection of vintage home decor had morphed into a full-fledged lifestyle brand. Amelia had expanded into artisanal furniture, handcrafted textiles, and a line of organic small-batch candles and soaps. Her eye for quality, her impeccable taste, and her genius for marketing had tapped into a zeitgeist of consumers hungry for authenticity and beauty. She was no longer a one-woman army. She had a small, dedicated team of remote employees, a customer service representative, a social media manager, and a logistics coordinator. The garage had been abandoned in favor of a rented warehouse space, and the hum of her laptop had been replaced by the constant ping of new orders, emails from suppliers, and messages from her growing team. She had become a master of compartmentalization. During the day, she was mum taking Olivia to the park, arranging playdates and reading bedtime stories. But the moment Olivia was asleep, she transformed into the CEO of her burgeoning empire, a sharp, savvy businesswoman who negotiated contracts, analyzed sales data, and made high-stakes decisions with a cool head and an iron will. The money, at first a trickle, had become a torrent. She had opened a separate bank account, a secret ledger of her success. She watched the numbers climb with a grim sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about the luxury, it was about the freedom. Each dollar was a brick in the fortress she was building around herself and her daughter, a fortress that Richard, with his casual cruelty and oblivious arrogance, would never be able to penetrate. The first crack in Richard's carefully constructed reality appeared on a Tuesday evening. He came home from work, complaining about a deal that had gone south, and tossed a stack of mail onto the kitchen counter. Bills, bills, and more bills, he grumbled. The cost of everything is going up. Amelia, who was calmly sipping a cup of tea, glanced at the mail. On top of the pile was a thick, glossy magazine, a high-end publication dedicated to interior design and entrepreneurship. On the cover, in a stunning, professionally shot photograph, was a woman with dark hair, a serene smile, and eyes that held a universe of secrets. It was her. The headline in bold, elegant font read, "Amelia Sterling, the silent titan of e-commerce, turns vintage charm into a multi-million-dollar empire." Richard stared at the cover, his mouth slightly agape. He picked it up as if it were a strange, alien object. He looked from the photograph to his wife, who was watching him with a calm, unreadable expression. "What is this?" he asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "It's a magazine," Amelia replied, her voice even. "They did a feature on the Gilded Cage." A feature he stammered, flipping through the pages to the lavish multi-page spread. There were photographs of her products, testimonials from ecstatic customers, and a detailed account of her business's meteoric rise. The article lauded her as a visionary, a marketing genius, a woman who had single-handedly built a brand that was redefining the landscape of online retail. It mentioned her multi-million-dollar empire. Richard sank into a chair, the magazine spread out on the table before him. He read the words, but they didn't seem to compute. Multi-million-dollar empire. This was his wife, the woman who organized his sock drawer and reminded him of his mother's birthday. How could she be this titan? I don't understand, he said, looking up at her, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified comprehension. When did this happen? It's been happening for a while, Richard. Amelia said, her voice devoid of any emotion. You just weren't paying attention. His mind reeled. The late nights on her laptop, the endless stream of packages, the hushed phone calls he'd overheard, it all clicked into place, forming a picture he had been too self-absorbed to see. He had been living with a stranger, a woman who had built an entirely separate life, a wildly successful life right under his nose. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him, shock, confusion, and a bitter, resentful jealousy. He had always been the successful one, the one with the high-powered career. The unspoken agreement in their marriage was that he was the star, and she was the supporting cast. Now the roles had been dramatically, irrevocably reversed. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, his voice rising. It wasn't a question born of genuine hurt. It was an accusation, a protest against this sudden, unwelcome shift in their power dynamic. Amelia took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea before answering. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long time. She saw not a partner, but an obstacle, a man whose ego was so fragile that her success was a threat to his identity. "Tell you what, Richard," she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "That I was building a future for myself and our daughter, that I was creating a life where I would never have to depend on a man who could laugh at me in my moment of greatest pain. I didn't think you'd be interested." The mention of the delivery room, a topic that had been buried under years of silence, hung in the air between them, a toxic, radioactive cloud. Richard flinched, as if he'd been struck. He had no defense, no comeback. He had laughed. It was a fact, an indelible stain on their history. And in that moment, he realized that he had not only lost his wife's love, but he had also lost her respect. And in the face of her quiet, formidable success, he felt a new, unfamiliar emotion. Fear. The ground beneath his feet was no longer solid. His world, the one he had so carefully constructed, was beginning to feel like a house of cards in a hurricane. And the hurricane had a name, Amelia Sterling. The magazine article was not just a revelation. It was a cataclysm. The carefully maintained facade of the Sterling family life crumbled overnight, exposing the deep, irreparable fissures beneath. Richard, once the undisputed king of his castle, found himself a bewildered and increasingly irrelevant figure in a world that was being reshaped by his wife's silent, relentless ambition. He tried to reclaim his position, to insert himself into her success. "We should celebrate," he declared a few days after the magazine came out. His voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. "I'll book a table at Le Ciel. Tell all our friends. We can make it a party for the Gilded Cage." Amelia looked up from her laptop, where she was finalizing a deal with a high-end hotel chain to furnish their boutique suites. "There's nothing for us to celebrate Richard," she said, her tone cool and dismissive. "This is my company." The "we" in their marriage had become a "you" and a "me," two separate entities with diverging paths. Richard's attempts to co-opt her success were clumsy and transparent. He started name-dropping the Gilded Cage at his office, trying to bask in the reflected glory of her achievements. "My wife, the entrepreneur," he'd say, a proprietary pride in his voice that made Amelia's skin crawl. But the world saw the truth. The magazine story had made Amelia a minor celebrity in the business world. Invitations to speak at conferences, to join exclusive networking groups, to sit on advisory boards poured in. They were addressed to Ms. Amelia Sterling, not Mrs. Richard Sterling. He was a footnote in her story, a detail from her past, not a partner in her present. The financial disparity between them became a chasm. While Richard's career in finance was respectable, it was bound by the traditional structures of salary and bonuses. Amelia's income was exponential, a force of nature that was rewriting their financial landscape. The tipping point came 6 months after the article was published. Amelia called a meeting, not in their sterile, silent living room, but in the sleek, minimalist boardroom of her new corporate headquarters, a stunning, light-filled space in a trendy downtown loft building. Richard arrived feeling like an outsider in his own life. He was ushered into the boardroom by Amelia's personal assistant, a sharp, efficient young woman who looked at him with a polite but distant professionalism. Amelia was already there, seated at the head of a long, polished concrete table. She was dressed in a tailored, power-red dress, her hair swept back in an elegant chignon. She looked formidable, a woman in complete command of her world. "Richard, thank you for coming," she said, her voice formal, as if addressing a business associate. "Amelia, what is this?" he asked, gesturing around the impressive room. "Why are we here?" She slid a thick folder across the table towards him. "I'm buying a new house," she announced, her voice even. "And I'm filing for divorce." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Divorce. The thought had crossed his mind in fleeting moments of anger and frustration, but he had never truly believed it would happen. He was Richard Sterling. People didn't divorce him. He opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were the legal documents, cold and official, and a glossy real estate brochure. The property featured was not a house. It was an estate. A sprawling, contemporary mansion nestled in the most exclusive, secluded enclave in the state, overlooking the ocean. It was a palace of glass and steel, with an infinity pool that seemed to melt into the horizon, a private cinema, a wine cellar, and acres of meticulously landscaped gardens. It was a world away from their comfortable but ultimately unremarkable suburban home. You're buying this," he stammered, the scale of her wealth, of her ambition, finally hitting him with its full crushing weight. "I've already bought it," she corrected him. "The sale closed last week. I paid in cash." Cash. The word hung in the air, a testament to the vast, unbridgeable gulf that now separated them. His entire net worth would barely cover the property taxes on a place like this. "And the divorce?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What about Olivia?" "The terms are all in there," Amelia said, gesturing to the legal documents. "They are, I believe you'll find, exceptionally generous. I'm not asking for a cent from you. I will, of course, have full custody of Olivia. You will have visitation rights, every other weekend, and alternating holidays." Every other weekend. The words were a death sentence to his vision of family, of fatherhood. He would be a visitor in his own daughter's life. "You can't do this, Amelia," he pleaded, the bluster and arrogance stripped away, leaving only a raw, desperate fear. "We're a family." Amelia's mask of cool professionalism finally cracked, and for a fleeting moment he saw the woman he had married, the woman whose heart he had broken. Her eyes blazed with a fire that had been smoldering for 5 long years. "A family," she repeated, her voice low and trembling with suppressed rage. "Where was this family when I was screaming in pain, bringing our daughter into the world? And you were laughing at me. Where was this family when I was up all night, building a future for our child, while you slept oblivious? You didn't want a family, Richard. You wanted an audience. You wanted a support system for your own ego. You just never realized that the person holding up the stage was the one with the real strength." She stood up, the meeting clearly over. "The movers will be at the house next week. They will pack your belongings and deliver them to an apartment I have leased for you downtown. It's fully furnished. You'll be comfortable." She was managing his exit from her life with the same ruthless efficiency with which she ran her business. He was being downsized, outsourced, made redundant. "So that's it?" he asked, a hollow feeling spreading through his chest. "I'm just dismissed." Amelia walked to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city, her back to him. "No, Richard," she said, her voice softer now, laced with a weary finality. "You're not dismissed. You're a guest. You will be a guest at Olivia's birthday parties, a guest at her school plays, a guest in the life we have built without you. You are welcome to visit, but you don't live here anymore." He left the boardroom in a tool, the heavy folder clutched in his hand. As he walked through the bustling open-plan office of the Gilded Cage, he saw the vibrant creative energy, the collaborative spirit, the world his wife had built. It was a world that had no place for him. He had laughed at her in her moment of weakness, and in doing so he had rendered himself obsolete in her moment of strength. He was no longer her husband, no longer her partner. He was about to become a guest in the magnificent, sprawling mansion of her success, a solitary figure rattling around in the empty echo chamber of his own regrets. The laughter had finally truly stopped, and the silence that followed was the sound of his world ending. The mansion was even more breathtaking and more alienating in person. The first time Richard drove his sensible sedan up the long, winding driveway, flanked by ancient oak trees and manicured lawns, he felt a profound sense of dislocation. His car seemed comically out of place, parked next to Amelia's sleek black Tesla in the cavernous four-car garage. A housekeeper, a polite uniformed woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Gable, greeted him at the door. "Sterling and Olivia are by the pool," she informed him, her tone professional but not unfriendly. "Please make yourself at home." But how could he make himself at home in a place that felt more like a modern art museum than a house? The ceilings soared to impossible heights. The walls were vast expanses of white, punctuated by large, dramatic canvases of abstract art. The furniture was minimalist and exquisitely expensive, each piece a statement of taste and wealth he couldn't begin to comprehend. He walked through the echoing open-plan living space, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the polished concrete floors. He felt like an intruder, a trespasser in this new rarefied world his wife and daughter now inhabited. He found them by the infinity pool, a shimmering sheet of blue that seemed to stretch into the endless expanse of the ocean beyond. Olivia, now a bubbly, bright-eyed 6-year-old, shrieked with delight as she splashed in the shallow end. Amelia was reclining on a lounge chair, reading a book, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face from the sun. She looked serene, untouchable, a goddess in her own private paradise. "Daddy!" Olivia cried, her face lighting up as she saw him. She scrambled out of the pool and ran into his arms, dripping water all over his work clothes. He hugged her tightly, burying his face in her wet hair, a surge of love and loss washing over him. This at least was real. This connection was the one thing he hadn't completely destroyed. "Hi, Pumpkin," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Amelia looked up from her book, a cool, polite smile on her face. "Richard," she said, her voice carrying easily in the still air. "You're early." It wasn't an accusation, but it wasn't a welcome either. It was a simple statement of fact. He was a visitor, and his arrival was a scheduled event. His weekends with Olivia became the focal point of his life, but they were always tinged with the bitterness of his new reality. He would pick her up from the mansion, a place where he was always greeted with polite deference, but never with warmth. He would take her to his small, sterile apartment, a place that felt temporary and soulless compared to the vibrant, love-filled world she inhabited with her mother. He tried to be the fun dad, taking her to amusement parks, zoos, and museums. He bought her expensive toys, hoping to buy her affection to compete with the sheer scale of the life Amelia provided. But Olivia, with the simple, unerring wisdom of a child, didn't care about the money. She just wanted her parents. "Why can't you live here with us, Daddy?" she asked one evening as he was tucking her into her bed in the guest room of the mansion, a room that was larger and more luxuriously appointed than his entire apartment. The question was a knife in his heart. It's complicated, sweetie," he stammered, unable to meet her innocent, questioning gaze. How could he explain that he had forfeited his right to live here with a single heartless laugh? How could he tell his daughter that he had failed her mother in the most fundamental way? He started to see Amelia not just as the woman who had left him, but as the woman she had become. He attended Olivia's school events, sitting a few rows behind Amelia, watching her interact with the other parents and teachers. She was confident, gracious, and deeply involved in her daughter's life. The other mothers looked up to her, admired her. The fathers were a little in awe of her, a little intimidated. She moved through the world with an effortless grace and power that he had never seen in her before. One day he arrived to pick up Olivia and found Amelia in her home office, a stunning glass-walled room that overlooked the ocean. She was on a video call, her voice firm and decisive as she negotiated the terms of an international distribution deal. He stood in the doorway, unseen, and listened. She was brilliant. The shy, accommodating art history student he had married was gone, replaced by this formidable, razor-sharp CEO. A sickening realization dawned on him. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the opportunity to be a partner to this incredible woman. He had been so blinded by his own ego, so convinced of his own superiority, that he had never truly seen her. He had seen a reflection of himself, a supporting character in his own story. He had never seen the Titan hiding in plain sight. The final crushing blow came on Olivia's 7th birthday. Amelia had thrown a lavish party, a fairy tale affair with a real pony, a magician, and a mountain of presents. Richard arrived, a brightly wrapped gift in his hand, feeling more like a distant relative than a father. He watched from the sidelines as Amelia and Olivia, both dressed in flowing white dresses, moved through the party, the twin centers of this happy, sun-drenched universe. They laughed together, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that echoed in the vast open spaces of the mansion. Later, as the guests were leaving, he found Amelia in the kitchen overseeing the cleanup. "It was a beautiful party," he said, his voice quiet. "Thank you," she said, not looking at him. "Olivia had a wonderful time." "Amelia," he began, his voice cracking. I am so sorry." She finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Sorry for what, Richard? For laughing? Or for not believing in me?" "For everything." He whispered the word, a confession of 1,000 small and large sins. "For not being the man you deserved. For not being the father Olivia deserved. I was a fool. I see that now." Amelia was silent for a long moment, studying his face. The anger in her eyes had long since faded, replaced by something that looked almost like pity. "Yes," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You were. But your apology, Richard, it doesn't change anything. You can't unring a bell. You can't unhear a laugh. I built this life, this world, for my daughter, not out of spite, but to protect her, to protect myself. I have no anger left for you. I simply have no space for you, not in the way you want." She turned back to the counter, her movements calm and deliberate. The conversation was over. He walked out of the mansion and into the cool night air. He got into his sensible car and drove away, the lights of the house receding in his rear-view mirror until they were just another star in the night sky. He was Richard Sterling, the man who had it all and threw it away with a single cruel laugh. He was a guest in his daughter's life, a ghost haunting the hallways of his wife's success. And as he drove into the darkness, the only sound was the echo of his own regret. A hollow, lonely sound that would follow him for the rest of his days. He had laughed when she cried, and now he was left with nothing but the silence. Another decade passed, and the world Amelia had built became an institution. The Gilded Cage was no longer just a brand. It was a global phenomenon, a benchmark for taste and aspirational living. Amelia Sterling herself was a household name, a subject of business school case studies, and a frequent though reluctant presence on lists of the world's most influential women. The mansion, once a symbol of her newfound freedom, had become her fortress, a sanctuary of serene, controlled perfection overlooking the turbulent ocean. Richard, too, had settled into a new, quieter existence. The 10 years had carved new lines on his face and stripped away the last vestiges of his youthful arrogance. He had left the high-pressure world of finance, finding a more modest and meaningful career as a financial advisor for a non-profit organization, helping families navigate debt and plan for their futures. He lived in the same comfortable, unremarkable apartment, a space that now felt less like a temporary stopgap and more like a home. The weekends he spent with his daughter were the unshakable pillars of his life. He never missed a single one. He was a constant, steady presence, a quiet counterpoint to the dazzling, high-powered world her mother provided. He was not the fun dad anymore. He was the listening dad, the one she called with homework questions, the one who taught her how to drive in his sensible sedan, the one whose silence was comfortable, not menacing. The fulcrum of their separate worlds was Olivia. At 17, she was a striking mix of her parents. She had Amelia's dark hair and thoughtful eyes, but Richard's easy smile and quick wit. She had grown up navigating the two starkly different realities of her parents' lives. She spent weekdays in the minimalist splendor of the mansion, a world of organic meals, private tutors, and curated experiences. On weekends, she was in Richard's world, a world of take-out pizza old movies and long, meandering conversations in the local park. She loved both her parents fiercely, but she was a child of the armistice born after the war was over, and she had never truly understood the reason for the profound, unbreachable treaty of silence that governed their interactions. The first crack in the carefully constructed piece appeared not with a bang, but with a college application essay. The prompt was deceptively simple. Describe a formative event in your life and how it has shaped your character. Olivia, a gifted student with a bright future, found herself staring at a blank screen. Her life from the outside seemed devoid of the kind of dramatic, character-forging events that make for compelling essays. It had been a life of privilege, of protection, of seamless comfort. The most significant event she could think of was her parents' divorce. But she had been too young to remember the cause, and the official story she'd been given, that they had simply grown apart, felt thin and unsatisfying. Driven by a nascent journalistic curiosity and the pressing deadline, she began to dig. In the vast digital archives of the internet, she found what she was looking for. It wasn't the famous magazine article about her mother's success. It was an older, obscure blog post, a "Where Are They Now" piece on some of the city's up-and-coming financiers from over a decade ago. The article on Richard mentioned his recent quiet divorce and contained a quote from an anonymous hospital source who recalled the dramatic birth of his daughter. The source recounted the story of a young, arrogant financier who had laughed loudly and mockingly at his wife during the height of her labor. Olivia read the words, and the world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from her face. Laughed. Her father, her kind, patient, gentle father, had laughed at her mother while she was giving birth to her. It couldn't be true. It was just anonymous gossip. But as the initial shock subsided, a cold, sickening sense of certainty settled in her gut. It was the missing piece, the skeleton key that unlocked all the mysteries of her family. Her mother's impenetrable reserve, her father's quiet, almost penitent demeanor, the palpable, invisible wall that stood between them, even during the most cordial of handoffs. The gilded cage she had lived in her entire life suddenly felt fragile. Its bars forged not just from her mother's strength, but from a deep foundational wound. She didn't confront her mother. The thought of bringing this ugly, buried thing to the surface, of causing her mother to relive that moment, was unbearable. Instead, she did what any 17-year-old in crisis might do. She rebelled, not in any spectacular headline-grabbing way. Her rebellion was quiet, insidious, and aimed at the heart of the perfection her mother had curated. Her grades, once stellar, began to slip. She became withdrawn, sarcastic, her easy smile replaced by a guarded, cynical pout. She started spending more time with a rebellious art house crowd from school, returning to the mansion late, her clothes smelling faintly of smoke, her eyes holding a new defiant glint. Amelia, a woman who could anticipate market trends and deftly navigate hostile corporate takeovers, was completely blindsided by the insurgency in her own home. She tried to handle it as she handled everything with control and logic. She scheduled meetings with Olivia's teachers, hired a new academic advisor, and tried to have calm, rational conversations with her daughter that went nowhere. "What's wrong, Olivia?" Amelia would ask, her voice laced with a frustration she tried to conceal. "If you need help, you just have to tell me." "Nothing's wrong," Olivia would reply, her gaze fixed on her phone. "I'm fine." The breaking point came when the headmaster of Olivia's exclusive private school called. He was deeply concerned about Olivia's sudden change in behavior and her academic decline. He wanted a meeting with both of her parents. The request sent a jolt of panic through Amelia. A meeting with Richard, not a brief exchange in the driveway, but a formal sit-down conference about their daughter's well-being. It was a scenario her fortress was not designed to handle. They met in the headmaster's oak-paneled office, the air thick with unspoken history. They sat in adjacent chairs, a foot of empty space between them that felt like a mile-wide canyon. Richard looked older, Amelia thought, but his eyes were clear and steady. He looked at her not with regret or longing, but with a simple, shared concern. The headmaster laid out the situation, his words painting a picture of a girl who was adrift, who was sabotaging herself. "She seems to be carrying a heavy burden," he concluded, looking from Amelia to Richard. "And she is pushing away anyone who tries to help." After the meeting, they walked in a silence to the parking lot. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows. "I think I know what this is about," Richard said, finally, his voice low. Amelia stopped her car keys in her hand. "What are you talking about?" "She found out," he said, his gaze unwavering. "About the delivery room, about what I did." Amelia felt the air leave her lungs. The one secret she had tried to shield her daughter from the ugly foundation upon which her empire was built was out. "How?" she whispered. "I don't know how. But I know my daughter. This kind of pain, this kind of anger, it has a source. And we," he said the word we, feeling foreign and strange, "are the source." For the first time in 16 years, Amelia felt the fortress walls begin to crumble. She had built a world to protect her daughter from the kind of pain and humiliation she had suffered, but in doing so, she had created a new kind of prison, a sterile environment where a wound like this could fester in silence. Her control, her greatest asset, had become her greatest liability. "What do we do?" she asked the question, an admission of defeat. She, the titan of industry, was asking for help from the man she had cast out of her life. "We can't fix this for her," Richard said, his voice imbued with a quiet wisdom she had never heard from him before. "But we can stop letting the past control the present. We can show her that people can change, that wounds can heal, even if they leave scars. We have to talk to her. Together." That evening, Richard didn't leave. Amelia, in a move that felt both terrifying and necessary, asked him to stay for dinner. They sat at the long, imposing dining table, the three of them, in a silence that was different from the ones that had come before. It wasn't empty. It was heavy with unspoken words waiting to be released. It was Olivia who finally broke it. "I read about it," she said, her voice small but clear, not looking at either of them. "Online. What happened when I was born?" Amelia reached for her daughter's hand, but Olivia pulled it away. Richard took a deep breath. "It's true, Olivia," he said, his voice raw with an ancient shame. "I did a cruel and unforgivable thing. I was a weak, arrogant boy who didn't know how to be a man, a husband, or a father. And your mother responded with a strength I couldn't comprehend. The life she built for you, this house, everything. It was her answer to my weakness." He looked at Amelia, his eyes filled not with the ghosts of their dead love, but with a profound, hard-won respect. "I have spent 17 years trying to become a man worthy of being your father. I have never for 1 second stopped being sorry for what I did." Tears streamed down Olivia's face. They were not tears of anger anymore, but of a wrenching, confusing sorrow. Amelia felt her own tears welling. She looked at Richard, the guest, the stranger, and saw him clearly for the first time in years. He was not the boy who had laughed. He was the man who had spent nearly 2 decades in quiet atonement. "He's right, Liv," Amelia said, her voice thick. "I built these walls so high to keep the pain out. I never realized I was also locking you inside with it. We have to find a way to talk about this. All of it." It was not a resolution. It was not a happy ending. The damage of that single cruel laugh could never be fully undone. But as the three of them sat at the table, the truth finally exposed to the light. The thick, unbreachable wall between them began to dissolve. The guest in the mansion had, for the first time, been invited in, not as a husband or a lover, but as a father, a partner in the messy, complicated, and necessary work of healing their daughter. The gilded cage was still standing, but for the first time, its door was open. The story of Amelia and Richard is a raw, unflinching look at how a single moment of disrespect can shatter a relationship and forge an empire. It's a testament to the quiet strength that can be born from profound pain. Amelia's journey from a heartbroken wife to a self-made millionaire isn't just about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about taking back her power, her identity, and her future. Richard's fate serves as a chilling reminder that our actions, especially towards those we claim to love, have consequences that can last a lifetime. What do you think? Was Amelia's transformation justified? Could Richard ever truly be redeemed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will make you think.